Get out of my bedroom. Celeste Moreau didn't even bother pulling up the sheet. She just looked at Vivienne, 7 months pregnant, rainwater dripping from her coat, hand pressed flat against the doorframe to keep herself standing, and smiled. Not a guilty smile, not a caught smile. The kind of smile that said, "I've been waiting for you to find out." "You should sit down," Celeste said, reaching for her wine glass on the nightstand. Adrienne's nightstand. "You look like you might fall." That was the moment. Not the sight of them together, not Adrienne's face going the color of old ash. It was Celeste Moreau, naked and unbothered in another woman's bed, offering her a seat like a host at a dinner party. If you have ever loved someone completely, trusted someone with your whole future, your body, your unborn child, and had that trust turned into a joke they didn't bother to hide, then you already know what Vivienne felt standing in that doorway. And if you don't, you're about to. Before we go further, if stories like this speak to you, if you've ever had to decide whether love was worth the cost, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that doorway, because what happens next changes everything. The phone was a habit more than a necessity. Vivienne Hale checked it constantly, not because she was anxious by nature, but because pregnancy had rearranged her relationship with time. She'd start a task and lose 20 minutes without knowing where they went. She'd read the same sentence 4 times and retain nothing. The phone kept her anchored, reminders for prenatal vitamins, appointment times. The name of the book, a parent at the literacy center had recommended for early readers. She'd left it on the kitchen counter that morning. She didn't realize until she was already downtown, standing outside the Eastside Children's Literacy Center with her bag over one shoulder and a box of donated picture books under the other arm. She thought about leaving it. The session was only 3 hours. She didn't need it. But one of the mothers, a quiet woman named Deborah, whose 4-year-old was just beginning to sound out vowels, had promised to text her about a community reading grant Vivienne had been trying to get off the ground for 6 weeks. That grant mattered. The program mattered. On the nights when Vivienne lay awake wondering what shape her life was going to take after the baby came, when the anxiety got specific and sharp-edged, it was the program she thought about. Not Adrienne's world, her world. Something she was building. So she handed the book box to a volunteer and turned back. The drive home took 40 minutes in the rain. Seattle in October had a particular kind of gray. Not the dramatic gray of storms, but the flat, stubborn gray of a city that had simply decided not to be bright for a while. Vivienne drove with both hands on the wheel, the heater on low, thinking about nothing in particular. The baby kicked twice. She spoke to it without embarrassment, the way she'd been doing for weeks. "Almost home," she said. "In and out." The penthouse building on Mercer had valet parking, but Vivienne preferred the side entrance when she was in and out quickly. The lobby security guard, a man named Patrick who'd worked the building for 11 years, waved her through with a nod. She took the private elevator, typed the code. The doors opened into the foyer of the penthouse. The lights were off in the main rooms. That was normal. Adrienne kept meetings at the office until well past 6 most days, and his assistant coordinated everything. Celeste Moreau, who had been with the Viscari organization for 3 years and was known, in the circles that knew such things, for being exceptionally good at her job. Vivienne heard the laughter before she saw anything. She stopped in the hallway. It was a specific kind of laughter. Low, deliberate, the sound of 2 people inside a shared joke that required proximity to tell. It was coming from the bedroom at the end of the hall. Their bedroom. The one with the gray linen curtains Vivienne had spent 3 weekends trying to find. The one where she'd set up the white noise machine last month because the baby responded to it. The one where Adrienne had pressed his ear against her stomach 2 Sundays ago and said something so quietly that Vivienne had to ask him to repeat it. "I didn't know it was possible to want something this much." She walked toward the sound. The bedroom door was half open. She pushed it the rest of the way. What she saw was not cinematic. There was no slow revelation, no dramatic lighting, no moment where the image took a long time to register. The brain is crueler than that. The brain takes it all in at once and files it immediately into a category it can never uncreate. Adrienne stood near the window, his shirt half unbuttoned, his back partially turned. Celeste Moreau sat on the edge of the bed in a way that made it very clear she had recently been in it. She had a wine glass in her hand and her dark hair was deliberately undone, and she was looking at Adrian with the easy ownership of a woman who did not feel like a guest. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Celeste looked toward the door, and she saw Vivienne, and she did not look away. That was the detail that Vivienne would turn over and over in the months that followed, not Adrian's face, which had gone slack with a kind of horror that seemed almost juvenile in its rawness. Not the wine glass, not the state of the room, not the earrings Celeste was still wearing that Vivienne recognized from Celeste's professional headshot on the company website. It was the steadiness, the complete, unhurried steadiness with which Celeste met Vivienne's eyes and held them. "You're home early," Celeste said. Adrian made a sound that wasn't a word. He moved forward. "Vivienne, don't." She said it quietly. She wasn't even sure she'd said it at all until she saw him stop. Her hand had found the doorframe. She wasn't holding it for drama. She was holding it because the floor had become unreliable, and her body understood what her mind was still catching up to. 7 months pregnant, and her center of gravity was already somewhere outside herself. And now the room was tilting in a direction that had no name. Celeste set the wine glass down on Adrian's nightstand. Slowly. She wasn't afraid. That was the part that split something open inside Vivienne's chest. The complete absence of fear. Guilt she could have processed. Shame she might have known what to do with. But this was neither. This was a woman who had done the calculation before Vivienne even walked through the door. "You should sit," Celeste said. Her voice carried the smooth, practiced warmth of someone who managed high-stakes conversations for a living. "You've had a shock." "Celeste," Adrian's voice had an edge in it now. "Stop." "I'm being practical," Celeste said, not looking at him. She was still looking at Vivienne. "She's pregnant. Standing in the cold isn't good for—" "Stop talking." But Celeste was already adjusting the lapel of her blazer, taking her time, as though she were simply wrapping up a meeting that had run long. "Adrian belongs beside someone who understands what he actually is," Celeste said. "Not someone who spends her afternoons reading picture books to other people's children and pretending that's a life." She picked up her phone from the dresser. "You're a good woman, I'm sure. But good women make poor partners for men like him. He needs someone who can keep up." For a moment the room was so quiet that Vivienne could hear the rain against the windows. Then she turned around and walked back down the hallway. "Vivienne!" Adrian was behind her. She could hear him pulling on his shirt, his footsteps uneven with urgency. "Vivienne, please, just let me—" She picked up her phone from the kitchen counter. It was sitting exactly where she'd left it, face down, slightly to the left of the fruit bowl. She picked it up and put it in her coat pocket and walked to the elevator. "Please." He was in the kitchen doorway now. She could feel him, but she didn't turn around. "Just let me explain. There are things you don't know. There are things I've been trying to protect you from. Please just—" The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. She pressed the button for the lobby, and she watched the doors close, and she watched his face disappear behind them. Not furious, not calculating, not the face of the man who ran one of the most feared criminal organizations on the West Coast. Just a man watching something go that he finally understood he could not keep. Patrick looked up when she crossed the lobby. He started to say something, probably about the weather. He often mentioned the weather. And then he looked at her face and he said nothing. He held the door open instead. She walked out into the rain without an umbrella. She didn't cry in the car. She'd expected to. She'd always assumed that if something terrible happened to her, she would cry immediately, that grief would announce itself loudly and demand to be heard. Instead, she drove east on Mercer with the heater on low and the radio off, and she thought about the strangest things. She thought about whether the literacy center had remembered to order new pencil grips for the Tuesday session. She thought about whether she'd returned the library book that was 3 weeks overdue. She thought about the first morning she'd woken up in that penthouse, before they were married, when Adrian had made coffee badly and she'd drunk it anyway without saying anything, and how that had felt like the beginning of a life. Her phone buzzed. Adrian. She turned it face down on the passenger seat. It buzzed 4 more times before she reached the freeway. She had not cried, and she did not know why, and it frightened her more than the tears would have. The baby moved. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach, a gesture that had become reflexive over the past few weeks, a small private language between herself and the life she was carrying, and she exhaled. "It's okay," she said. She wasn't sure who she was saying it to. She drove for almost an hour before she knew where she was going. Naomi Hale lived in a narrow three-story house in Capitol Hill that she'd bought 9 years ago, when the neighborhood was still transitioning and lawyers of her caliber didn't usually live there. Naomi liked to say she'd bought it for the bones. What she meant was that she'd bought it because it was hers, and that distinction mattered to her more than anything with better bones and a better zip code. The two sisters had not spoken in 8 months. It was not one large argument, but a series of smaller ones that had accumulated like sediment until neither of them could see the original riverbed. Naomi had never been fond of Adrian. She'd said so once, directly, the way Naomi did everything. Vivienne had defended him. Then they'd started talking around it instead of through it, and around became the only direction they knew, and eventually the conversation stopped altogether. Vivienne parked outside the house and sat in the car for 10 minutes. The lights were on in the upstairs office window. That was Naomi, working past 9 on a Tuesday, always had, probably always would. Vivienne used to tease her about it. "You're going to die at your desk." And Naomi would say there are worse places. Vivienne rang the doorbell. She heard footsteps. Then a pause. Naomi checking through the peephole, the way she always did. The careful habits of a woman who'd spent a decade representing clients that powerful people would rather silence than pay. The door opened. Naomi took one look at her sister, soaking wet, one hand on her stomach, the other hanging uselessly at her side. And she didn't say anything. Not what happened, or "Are you okay?" or "I knew it." She just opened the door wider and stepped back and let Vivienne in from the rain. Vivienne sat at the kitchen table while Naomi put the kettle on. She watched her sister move around the kitchen that she'd visited a handful of times over the years. Efficient, unsentimental, precise. A woman who boiled water the same way she argued motions. "Tell me," Naomi said. So Vivienne told her. She kept her voice flat the whole way through. She got to the part about Celeste's speech. Good women make poor partners for men like him. And for a moment her voice went somewhere unstable, and she stopped, and she breathed, and she came back. When she finished, the tea was ready. Naomi set the cup in front of her and sat down across the table with her own. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She didn't speak for a full minute. That was Naomi's particular discipline. She never said the first thing that occurred to her, because the first thing was usually fury, and fury was loud and fury made mistakes. "You're not going back," Naomi said finally. It wasn't a question. "No." "Okay." Naomi took a sip of her tea. "Then let's talk about what comes next." What came next was Naomi. Vivienne had forgotten, or maybe she'd allowed herself to forget, in the years she'd spent in Adrian's world, what it was like to have her sister fully on her side. Naomi in advocacy mode was a different person than Naomi in neutral. She was specific. She was fast. She asked questions that Vivienne didn't know she needed to answer until she was answering them. Who held the medical insurance? What was in Vivienne's name versus joint? Whether she had access to any account that Adrian could not freeze unilaterally in the next 24 hours. By midnight, Naomi had texted 3 people. One was a locksmith she trusted. One was a financial consultant she'd worked with on a case 2 years ago. The third was a name Vivienne didn't recognize. "Damian Cross," Naomi said, setting down her phone. "He's the best family attorney in the state, possibly the country. He's difficult and expensive, and he wins." "Naomi, I know what you're going to say. I don't want a war." Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Not unkindly, just clearly. "Vivienne," she said, "you walked into your bedroom tonight and found your husband with his assistant, and his assistant told you that you weren't enough for him. You're 7 months pregnant, and you think there's a version of this that isn't a war?" Vivienne looked down at her tea. "I need you to let me help you," Naomi said. "Not because you're weak, because you are exhausted and you are carrying a child and you deserve someone fighting for you right now who isn't also devastated." She paused. "Let me be the one who isn't devastated." Vivienne looked at her sister. 8 months of distance. 8 months of phone calls that didn't happen, of birthdays that got acknowledged by text, of a relationship that had slowly become a formality. And still Naomi had opened the door. "Okay," Vivienne said. "Okay." Outside, the rain kept falling on Seattle like it had made a commitment it intended to keep. Adrian called 11 times before Vivienne turned her phone off. He sat in the penthouse kitchen, the same kitchen she'd walked through 2 hours ago, the same fruit bowl, the same counter. And he called and called, and the calls went to voicemail, and he didn't leave messages because what he had to say could not survive being recorded. Celeste had left. He told her to leave, and she'd left without argument, and the ease with which she'd gone had finally begun to disturb him in a way he hadn't let himself feel before. He was good at not feeling things he didn't want to feel. It was a skill he'd developed young and refined professionally, but tonight the skill was failing him. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey and didn't drink it. He stood at the window and watched the rain move across the city that he nominally controlled. The supply chains, the debts, the silence that money bought. And he felt, for the first time in longer than he could honestly say, completely powerless. Not because of what he'd lost, because of who was carrying it out the door. He thought about the morning she'd drunk his terrible coffee without saying anything. He hadn't told her he knew until 6 months later, and she'd laughed until she had to hold the table. And he'd thought then, not in those exact words, but in the wordless, specific way that real recognitions happen. This is the one thing I cannot afford to ruin. He picked up his whiskey. He thought about all the things he hadn't told her, the threats that had come in July, routed through a source he'd spent weeks trying to trace, the accounts he'd rerouted, the lawyers he'd consulted quietly, the trust he'd been building brick by brick in the name of their unborn daughter. He'd done it all without telling her because he'd told himself he was protecting her. Standing here now, he understood what he'd actually been doing. He'd been making decisions about her life without trusting her to handle them. He'd been protecting himself from the difficulty of the conversation. He'd called it love. He'd called it keeping her safe. But the name for it, the honest name, was something he didn't want to say in an empty room. He set the whiskey down untouched. He pulled out a different phone, not the personal one, the other one, and he made a call that went straight through. "I need eyes on her," he said. "Not contact, just distance. She doesn't know, she doesn't see anyone." He paused. "She's safe." The man on the other end of the line knew what that meant. Adrian hung up. He stood in the kitchen for another minute. Then he walked back to the bedroom and stood in the doorway and looked at the room that still carried the shape of everything that had just ended. He should have been making calls about damage control. He should have been managing the business implications of whatever Celeste had told her handlers tonight, because he had begun to understand slowly and then all at once that Celeste's presence in his life had not been accidental. He should have been doing a lot of things. Instead, he stood in the doorway of his bedroom and he did nothing. Because some part of him, the part that still remembered bad coffee and real laughter, and a woman who read picture books to other people's children like it was a privilege, understood that tonight was not the beginning of a problem he could solve. It was the end of something he had already lost. The first morning without Adrian was a Wednesday. Vivienne knew this because she counted it. She lay on the narrow guest bed in Naomi's upstairs room, the one with the slanted ceiling and the window that faced the neighbor's oak tree. And she counted the hours back to the moment in the elevator, and then she counted forward to now, and the number was 14. 14 hours since she'd watched the doors close on his face. 14 hours since she'd walked out into the rain with nowhere specific to go and ended up exactly where she needed to be. She was 31 years old, she was 7 months pregnant. She had her phone, her wallet, her coat, and the prenatal vitamins she kept in her bag out of paranoia. That was the inventory of her current life. She lay there with one hand on her stomach and listened to Naomi moving around downstairs. The specific efficiency of her sister's morning, the coffee grinder, the back door opening and closing, the controlled percussion of a woman who had built her entire existence around the discipline of not falling apart. Vivienne had always found that quality faintly exhausting in her sister. Now she found it the most comforting thing she'd ever heard. She picked up her phone. 43 missed calls. 11 voicemails she wasn't ready to open. 22 texts ranging in length from 2 words to what appeared to be, based on the preview, a paragraph. She scrolled without reading. She was looking for Deborah's text about the reading grant. She found it buried between Adrian's 3rd and 4th attempt at contact. Grant coordinator said she'd call Thursday. Fingers crossed. Vivienne typed back, "Thank you. Thursday is good." She put the phone face down and stared at the slanted ceiling until she heard Naomi at the bottom of the stairs. "There's coffee, and I need you downstairs in 20 minutes. "For what?" "Damien Cross has a 9 o'clock. I moved it here so you don't have to go anywhere." Vivienne sat up slowly. The baby shifted with her, redistributing weight in the way that had become familiar over the past few weeks. A negotiation of space, two bodies in close quarters working out an arrangement. Naomi, it's been one night. I know how long it's been. Naomi's voice was patient in the way that meant it would not remain patient. 19 minutes. Damian Cross arrived at 8:58 in a coat that had been expensive once and now simply looked like it belonged to him. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, with the kind of face that had stopped trying to look friendly and settled instead for trustworthy. He sat at Naomi's kitchen table with a legal pad that he wrote on in small, fast handwriting, and he asked Vivienne questions for 90 minutes without once lowering his voice to soften them. He asked about the financial accounts, about whose name was primary, about prenatal care documentation and what hospital she'd registered at, about whether she had any written communication from Adrian regarding the pregnancy, texts, emails, anything dated. He asked about Celeste Moreau. How long has she worked for him? 3 years, Vivienne said, since before we were married. Did you have direct interaction with her? Some. She managed his calendar. She'd call me occasionally to coordinate events, dinners. She was always professional. Vivienne paused. I didn't dislike her. That's the thing. I didn't have a feeling about her one way or the other. Damian wrote something. And last night, she spoke directly to you? Yes. Tell me exactly what she said. Vivienne told him. She said it the same way she'd told Naomi, flat and precise, because the flatness was the only way she could say it without it becoming something else entirely. When she got to the part about good women make poor partners for men like him, Damian stopped writing. She said that. Word for word. He looked at Naomi. Something passed between them that Vivienne couldn't fully read. Not surprise exactly, but a species of heightened attention. Okay, Damian said, and wrote something else. Here's what I want you to understand going in. You have a strong position. You are 7 months pregnant, married, with established shared assets. Washington is a community property state. However, he tapped his pen on the pad. Adrian Viscari is not a standard opposing party. He has resources, he has people, and he has considerable motivation to control the narrative of this divorce before it becomes a public event. I don't want a public event, Vivienne said. I know, but what you want and what he'll allow are two different negotiations. He closed the legal pad. I need access to your joint financial records. All of them, not summaries, everything. She'll have that for you by end of day, Naomi said. Vivienne looked at her sister. I don't actually know where... I do, Naomi said. Adrian's accountant filed joint returns through my firm's document portal 2 years ago during the property consolidation. I still have access. Vivienne stared at her. You had access to our financial records the whole time? I had access to copies of filed documents that you authorized as part of the consolidation process. Yes. Naomi picked up her coffee. I didn't look at them. Until now, I didn't have a reason to. It was such a Naomi thing to say that Vivienne almost laughed. Almost. Adrian showed up at 11:15. Vivienne knew because she saw him from the upstairs window, the black car parked half a block down, the wrong kind of still for a car that had simply stopped. She watched it for 3 minutes before she went downstairs. He's outside, she told Naomi. Naomi set down her laptop. He's not coming in. I know, I'm just... Vivienne stopped. I'm telling you. Naomi looked at her for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. Vivienne only heard one side of it. This is Naomi Hale. I'm calling to advise you that your client is currently parked outside my residence, which is also the current residence of his estranged wife. If he attempts to enter the property or make direct contact against her wishes, I'll be filing an emergency motion by 2 o'clock. She paused. I'm glad we understand each other. She hung up. That was his attorney? His corporate attorney. He doesn't have a family attorney yet, which tells me he thought he could handle this without one. Naomi turned back to her laptop. He can't. 20 minutes later, the black car was gone. The call from Adrian's corporate attorney, a man named Hargrove, who spoke with the careful diction of someone billing by the syllable, came at 1 in the afternoon. Naomi took it in her office with the door closed. Vivienne sat in the kitchen and listened to the silences between the parts she could hear through the wall, which was not much, just the rhythm of her sister's voice rising and falling with the cadences of someone making and dismissing points with equal efficiency. When Naomi came out, she stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Hargrove says Adrian wants to meet, Neutral location. No attorneys, just the two of you. Vivienne's hands were flat on the table. No. That's what I told him. What did he say? He said Adrian needs to speak with you privately about a matter of personal safety that affects you and the baby. Naomi's voice was perfectly level. He used that phrase specifically, personal safety. Vivienne looked at her. What does that mean? I don't know yet. Naomi came and sat down across from her. It could be a manipulation tactic. Make you feel like you're in danger so you run back to the one person who's told you he can protect you. That's a classic, or it's real. A pause. Or it's real, Naomi agreed, which is why Damien is already looking into it. She folded her hands on the table. Either way, you're not meeting him alone. Not now, not until we know what we're working with. What they were working with arrived in Damien Cross's email at 4:17 that afternoon. He called Naomi's landline. He was one of perhaps 9 people in the country who still used landlines as a primary contact method, and Naomi respected him for it. And he spoke for 6 minutes. Naomi listened with a pen in her hand that she didn't write with. When she came back into the living room, Vivienne knew from the set of her sister's shoulders that something had shifted. Sit down, Naomi said. I'm already sitting. Right. Naomi sat across from her. She looked like she was organizing a brief in her head, choosing the sequence, deciding what was load-bearing. Damien's financial analyst pulled the joint account history going back 18 months. There are transfers, large ones, through multiple shell corporations, all traceable if you know what you're looking at. Vivienne felt something cold move through her. He was hiding money. That's the obvious read. It's also not necessarily the right one. Naomi said it carefully. The transfers don't end in personal accounts. They end in a trust, a discretionary trust established 8 months ago in the name of… She paused, just briefly. Your daughter. The room was very quiet. He set up a trust for the baby, Vivienne said slowly. An emergency trust, structured specifically to be unreachable by third parties. Damien says the legal architecture of it is, and I'm quoting him, obsessively protective. It's not designed to hide money from you. It's designed to protect a specific person from specific threats. Naomi held her gaze. He has a contact who tracks syndicate movement. Apparently there were credible threats from a rival organization in July. Someone was sending messages through channels that Adrian's people monitor. The threats were directed at his heir. Vivienne said nothing. He knew someone was coming for the baby, Naomi said, before she was born. And instead of telling you, he moved money into a protected trust and apparently, Damien is still verifying this part, hired 3 private security contractors to monitor your movements without your knowledge. He was watching me. The words came out with no particular inflection because Vivienne had not yet decided how she felt about them. This whole time. For your safety. That's the argument. Naomi leaned forward. And I want to be very clear with you, Vivienne, because this is exactly the moment where it gets complicated. That argument might be partially true, and the betrayal is still entirely real. Both of those things can be true at the same time. One does not cancel out the other. Vivienne's hand had gone to her stomach again. The baby was still. Even the baby seemed to be waiting. He had an affair, Vivienne said. He had an affair, and there were threats, and he moved money, and he put security on me, and he didn't tell me about any of it. Correct. That's not protecting me. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it now. That's managing me. That's deciding I wasn't capable of handling my own life and making every single decision himself and calling it love. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it is. Adrian's second attempt at contact came through a method Vivienne hadn't anticipated. Her mother called. Elaine Hale was 73 and lived in Spokane and had not liked Adrian Viscari from the moment Vivienne introduced them. But she was also a woman who had been married to one man for 41 years before he died, and who therefore believed, as a matter of deep personal conviction, that marriage was a territory where outside forces should not interfere. She called Vivienne's cell at 6 in the evening. He called me, Elaine said, without preliminary. He called me himself, from his personal number. He sounded… She hesitated. Not well. Mom, I'm not telling you to go back. I'm telling you he called me. And that's not something a man does when he's managing a situation. That's something a man does when he's desperate. Being desperate doesn't make him right. No, Elaine agreed. It doesn't. A pause. He told me there's something he's been trying to tell you that he hasn't been able to get through. He said, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to misquote him. He said, there are people who are going to use what happened between us as an opening. I need her to know that before it becomes her problem instead of mine. Vivienne stood in Naomi's kitchen with the phone against her ear and the refrigerator humming and the rain starting again outside. He's trying to scare me into talking to him, she said. Maybe. Elaine's voice was careful. Or maybe a man who runs the kind of organization he runs knows when a threat is real. Another pause. I'm not defending him. What he did is not something I will defend. I needed to tell you he called. What you do with it is your business. After she hung up, Vivienne stood at the kitchen window and watched the rain run down the glass in crooked lines that went nowhere in particular. Naomi appeared in the doorway. Your mother? He called her. Naomi's jaw tightened, just slightly. Of course he did. She didn't tell me to go back. Good. She told me what he said. Vivienne turned from the window. Naomi, if the threats are real, if there are actually people who want to hurt her because of who her father is, then us being here, in your house, away from his security. Damien has already spoken to a private security firm, Naomi said. 2 people outside tonight. You won't see them. Vivienne stared at her sister. You already thought of this. I thought of it this morning, Naomi said, without apology. While you were sleeping. The next 3 days had a particular texture that Vivienne would later struggle to describe. Not peaceful, not chaotic, but suspended. Like the moment between lightning and thunder where you know the sound is coming but it hasn't arrived yet. She stayed in Naomi's house. She attended a prenatal appointment at a clinic across town, with Naomi driving and a man in a gray sedan that she now knew was security following 3 car lengths behind. The doctor, a calm Korean-American woman named Dr. Yoon, who Vivienne had been seeing for 6 months, checked measurements and heartbeat and asked routine questions about stress levels. Vivienne said she was managing. Dr. Yoon looked at her over the chart. You don't have to manage. You have to be honest with me. Honestly, Vivienne stopped. She thought about what the right word was. I'm in the middle of something, and I'm trying not to let the middle of it become the inside of it. Dr. Yoon wrote something. That's a reasonable goal. Here's mine. Your blood pressure was elevated last week. Today, it's in the acceptable range. I want it to stay there. She closed the chart. Whatever's happening in your personal life, I need you to sleep. That's not optional. Everything else you can figure out while awake. Vivienne nodded. She slept that night for 4 hours, which was the best she'd managed in 3 days. The phone rang at 2 in the morning, not her cell. Naomi's landline. She heard Naomi pick up in the room across the hall. Heard her voice drop into a register that meant something was wrong. Not a bill, not a client emergency. Something else. Vivienne lay still in the dark and listened to the silence that came after. Naomi knocked on her door. Come in. Her sister was standing in the doorway in a gray t-shirt and the kind of expression she wore in court when something unexpected appeared in evidence. That was Damien, she said. He has a source inside the Viscari organization, not someone Adrian put there, someone who reached out to Damien independently. She paused. Celeste Moreau has been missing since Tuesday night. Vivienne sat up. Missing. She didn't show up to a meeting Wednesday morning. Her apartment was empty. Her personal car was in the garage, but her overnight bag was gone. Naomi crossed her arms. Damien's source says there are people asking questions in Adrian's organization about what she knew and what she'd given to outside parties. You think Adrian? I don't know. Naomi said it quickly. I don't know. I'm telling you what Damien told me. Vivienne pushed her hair back from her face. The baby moved. A slow, rolling movement, the kind that felt more like a statement than a reaction. If she's missing, Vivienne said carefully, and people in his organization are asking what she gave to outside parties. She stopped. What does that mean? It means Celeste Moreau may have been more than a mistress, Naomi said. It means the affair may have had a purpose that had nothing to do with love. She held Vivienne's gaze. It means there is a possibility, not a certainty, a possibility, that you were not the target of what happened in that bedroom. The words sat between them. You mean I was collateral, Vivienne said. Naomi didn't answer, which was itself an answer. By Thursday morning, Damien Cross had driven to Naomi's house himself. He sat at the kitchen table again, same legal pad, same fast handwriting. But the quality of the room was different today. The air in it had changed. "Here's what I know," he said. 3 weeks before the night you came home, Adrian's organization intercepted communications between a rival group and an unknown internal party. The communications referenced the marriage, the pregnancy, and the trust accounts. He looked at Vivienne. Someone inside his world was feeding information to his rivals. Financial information, personal information, enough to build a case for destabilizing the leadership of his organization. Vivienne's coffee was in her hands. She hadn't drunk it. "And Celeste, we don't know, not definitively." Damien's voice was careful. "What we do know is that Celeste Moreau was hired 18 months ago through a recruitment firm that has since been traced to a shell company connected to the rival organization." He paused. "The affair may have been engineered." The word engineered hung in the air. Vivienne set her coffee down. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that my husband was seduced by a woman who was placed inside his organization specifically to destroy his marriage. I'm telling you that's a serious possibility, not confirmed. And he didn't know. Based on what we can see, he did not know." Vivienne looked out the kitchen window. The oak tree outside was dropping its last leaves in the October rain, one at a time, with a kind of patience that was indifferent to everything watching it. "Does it change anything?" Naomi asked quietly. She was asking Vivienne, not Damien. Vivienne didn't answer immediately. She sat with the question the way you sit with something that deserves to be held before it's answered. "He still had an affair," she finally said. "Engineered or not, she was still in our bedroom." She touched her stomach. "I still walked out in the rain." She looked at her sister. "Maybe she was placed there. Maybe she was sent to destroy us. That doesn't change the fact that she succeeded." Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something. "Because he let her." Naomi nodded slowly. "Once." "Then we proceed," Damien said. "We proceed," Vivienne agreed. She filed the divorce petition on a Friday. Not dramatically, not with press or announcements or any of the theater that people in Adrian's world seemed to organize their lives around. Damien walked her through the document in the morning. She read every page. She asked questions about 2 clauses regarding custodial access. She suggested one amendment that Damien said was excellent. Then she signed it. Her hand was steady. She had been afraid before she picked up the pen that the signing would feel like loss, would feel like the official documentation of a life ending. Instead, it felt like something else, like a door closing from the inside by her own hand at a time of her choosing, like the difference between being left and leaving. She was leaving. Damien filed it at 2 o'clock. Adrian received notification at 2:43, according to Hargrove, who called Naomi's cell at 3:15 to relay the response. Mr. Viscari's requests are now filed through Discovery, Naomi said, and ended the call. Adrian sat in his office on the 42nd floor and looked at the notification on his phone for a long time. He had known it was coming. He had known from the moment the elevator doors closed that this was not a crisis he could negotiate his way out of, could not buy his way through, could not solve with the machinery he'd spent 15 years building precisely for the purpose of solving things. Some things did not respond to power. He'd always understood this theoretically. He understood it differently now. He called his most trusted lieutenant, a man named Marco, who had been with the Vescari organization for 20 years and who communicated primarily in short sentences. "Celeste," Adrian said. "Still no trace," Marco said. "The rival side?" "Movement. Nothing specific yet. But there's chatter." A pause. "They know the petition was filed." Adrian stared at the Seattle skyline through his office window. The rain had stopped. The city was wet and gray and ordinary-looking from 42 floors up, all its complexity flattened into a single surface. "They'll move," he said. "Probably." "Then we move first." He paused. "And Marco, nobody near her house. Nobody near the clinic. Nobody anywhere near her that she can see or feel or sense in any way. Understood?" "Understood." "She needs to know she's free," Adrian said. "Even if she's not safe, she needs to believe it right now." He hung up. He sat alone in the office that smelled like leather and old money, and the specific kind of silence that belongs to rooms where important decisions have been made. And he looked at the divorce notification again, and for a long moment he did not move. Then he pulled out a different phone, one that Hargrove didn't know about, and he made a call to a number that connected to a man who dealt in information nobody wanted to be traceable. "I need everything on Celeste Moreau," he said. "Everything you can find. Who she worked for before the firm. Who recruited her. What she was paid and by whom." He paused. "And I need it before the people looking for her find her first." Because Adrian Viscari had spent 15 years learning one thing above all others. In his world, the moment of maximum personal destruction was also the moment of maximum exposure. And his enemies, whoever they were, wherever they'd placed Celeste, whatever they'd built inside the architecture of his marriage, had timed this perfectly. The divorce petition was not the end of a story. It was the signal that something else was beginning. And somewhere in a city that was just beginning to dry out after 3 days of rain, his 7-month pregnant wife was sleeping in her sister's guest room with 2 security contractors parked outside and the signed paperwork of her exit from his life already in the hands of a court system that could not protect her from what was actually coming, and had no idea it was even on its way. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, 11 days after the divorce petition was filed. Vivienne was already awake. She'd been awake since 4:30, which had become her new normal, the baby pressing against her ribcage in a way that made deep sleep increasingly theoretical, her mind cycling through the same inventory of anxieties in the dark quiet of Naomi's guest room. The financial documents, the custody framework Damien had outlined, the question she kept not answering about whether she wanted to stay in Seattle or go somewhere smaller, somewhere that didn't have Adrian Viscari's name written invisibly across half its skyline. She heard Naomi's voice through the wall at 6:03, not the controlled, measured voice her sister used for early client calls. Something tighter, something with a wire in it. Vivienne sat up. By the time she'd gotten her robe on and made it to the hallway, Naomi was already standing outside her own bedroom door with the phone still in her hand, and her face arranged in an expression Vivienne had never seen on her before. Not quite fear. Something adjacent to it. The expression of a person who has just been handed information that requires a moment to structurally absorb. "What happened?" Vivienne said. It wasn't a question. Naomi looked at her. "Damien," she said, "he needs to come over. Now." "Tell me what happened." A pause. Just long enough to be its own kind of answer. They found Celeste. Damien arrived at 7:15 with a younger associate named Ruth, who carried a leather document case and said nothing for the entirety of the meeting. He sat at the kitchen table. He had not slept. The evidence of it was in the particular stillness of someone running on determination rather than rest. He opened a folder. Celeste Moreau was located last night at a property outside Olympia, not by Adrian's people, by federal contacts working a parallel investigation into the rival organization. He set a photograph on the table. Vivienne didn't look at it. "She's alive. She was held for 8 days. She has a broken wrist and a significant concussion, and she has been talking at considerable length to people who are very interested in what she has to say." Naomi had her arms crossed. "What does she have to say?" Damien looked at Vivienne first. Not at Naomi. At Vivienne. "The affair was not voluntary," he said, "not in any meaningful sense of that word." The kitchen was very quiet. "Explain that," Vivienne said. "Celeste Moreau was recruited 22 months ago by a man named Dorian Voss, who operates the financial infrastructure of the Kessler organization, which is the rival syndicate that has been trying to absorb the Vescari territories for the better part of a decade." He kept his voice even. Clinical. The voice of a man delivering facts that he knows will be felt as wounds. She was told her job was information gathering. She had access to Adrian's calendar, his communications, his financial routing. She provided that information, but approximately 7 months in, Voss decided the intelligence operation wasn't moving fast enough. He paused. "He told her to get closer," Naomi said flatly. "He told her to get close enough to destabilize the marriage," Damien said, "and he was specific about the method." He looked at Vivienne again. "She has said, and this is in a recorded statement, that she refused initially, that she was threatened, that members of the Kessler organization made it clear what would happen to her family in Lyon if she did not comply." Vivienne stared at the table. "She has a sister in France," Damien continued, "2 nieces. She was shown photographs of them. She was told the photographs were recent." He closed the folder. "She seduced Adrian under duress. The affair lasted 4 months. She attempted to end it twice, and both times Voss's people made contact with her to remind her what non-compliance looked like. Nobody spoke. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree was absolutely still. No wind, no movement. The whole world seemed to have stopped to listen. The night Vivienne came home, Damien said, Celeste knew she was there. She had been told, by Voss's people, that a call had been made to someone in the building who would ensure Vivienne came back for a forgotten item. He held Vivienne's gaze now and did not look away. She didn't stumble into being caught. She was positioned to be caught. The destruction of the marriage was the final objective, and Vivienne walking in on them was not an accident. Vivienne heard the words. She heard all of them. She heard them the way you hear something when every part of your brain understands the content, but one specific part, the part that had been holding a particular shape of the world together for 11 days, has to dismantle itself first before the meaning can fully land. Someone called my building, she said, to make sure I came home. We believe so. Someone knew I'd left my phone, or ensured you would. She thought about the morning, the literacy center, the box of picture books. The moment she'd reached into her bag and not found the phone, how natural it had felt, how completely ordinary. The phone, she said slowly. Naomi looked at her. I always keep it in my bag. I'm paranoid about it. I always double-check. Vivienne's voice had gone very quiet. I've left my keys before. I've left my wallet twice. I have never once left my phone. The silence in the kitchen changed quality. You think someone took it out of your bag, Naomi said. I think someone took it out of my bag and put it on the counter and waited for me to notice. Damien wrote something on the legal pad. He wrote it slowly, which was not his usual speed, which meant it was important, and he was making sure he got it exact. I'll need the names of everyone who had access to the penthouse that morning, he said. Vivienne went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, and she held very still, and she let the full weight of it settle over her, which was the only thing she knew how to do with information this size. Not process it, not organize it, just let it land and feel all the ways it was heavy. Everything she had believed about that night was structurally accurate and fundamentally wrong. Adrian had been in that room with Celeste. That was true. True. The scene she had walked into had been real. The undone hair, the wine glass, the particular atmosphere of two people who had been together. All of it real. All of it also built. Constructed by people she had never met, for purposes that had nothing to do with her, using her marriage as raw material. She had walked out of her own life because someone had decided it would be strategically useful for her to do so. That was the thing she kept coming back to. Not the affair. Not even Adrian. The cold arithmetic of it. Someone had sat in a room somewhere and decided that the most efficient way to destabilize a criminal empire was to destroy the woman at its center. Not threaten her. Not confront her. Just engineer a Tuesday afternoon that would make her leave on her own. And it had worked. She pressed both hands flat against her stomach. The baby moved under her palms. A familiar, purposeful movement, the one that felt like confirmation rather than accident. She sat there for a long time. Naomi came up at 9. She knocked, opened the door, sat on the chair in the corner without asking, the way she'd been doing since they were teenagers sharing a house. And the chair in the corner was just where you sat when the bed was occupied by someone who needed to stay horizontal. Say it, Vivienne said. Say what? Whatever you've been organizing since Damien left. Naomi was quiet for a moment. It doesn't change the petition. I know. Even if the affair was coerced, even if she was placed there, I know, Naomi. He still made choices. He chose not to tell you about the threats. He chose to move money without telling you. He chose to put security on you without your knowledge. Naomi's voice was firm, but there was something careful underneath it. Celeste being a victim doesn't make you less of one. I know, Vivienne said again, and then, but it makes him less of a villain. Naomi didn't answer that. Does it change how you feel? She asked instead. Vivienne looked at the slanted ceiling, the water stain in the far corner that had been there since Naomi moved in and had never quite been addressed. The small geography of her sister's life, accumulated over years of choosing to stay in one place. I don't know yet, Vivienne said. I think I need to feel angry about it before I can feel anything else about it. And right now I'm too... She stopped. I'm too cold. I'm not angry. I'm just cold. That'll change. I know. When it does, I'll tell you. Vivienne turned her head to look at her sister. Naomi, what are the odds that whoever organized this is done? What are the odds that Celeste being found and talking is the end of it? Naomi held her gaze. She didn't answer, which was itself an answer. The anger arrived at noon. It arrived the way Vivienne had always experienced her worst emotions. Not all at once, not cinematically, but in a specific moment when something small cracked the controlled surface and everything beneath it came through the gap. She was making tea. She was standing at Naomi's kitchen counter filling the kettle and thinking about the morning she'd left her phone, reconstructing it the way Damien would reconstruct it, looking for the seams, and she remembered with sudden absolute clarity that she had double-checked her bag before leaving the penthouse. She remembered it because she always did, because she was meticulous about the phone, and she had checked the side pocket and the main compartment, and she had been certain it was there. She had been certain. She set the kettle down on the counter. She stood with both hands flat on the granite, and she breathed through it, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the technique Dr. Yoon had given her for blood pressure management, which was not designed for this specific application, but was what she had. And she felt the anger move through her like a current. Not hot, not explosive. The cold, structural kind of anger that doesn't make noise because it doesn't need to. Someone had been in her home. Someone had gone through her bag while she was getting ready for a morning at a children's literacy center, while the baby was shifting inside her and she was thinking about pencil grips and reading grants, and they had taken her phone out and put it on a counter and walked away, knowing exactly what the rest of the day would look like. She picked up her own phone and called Adrian. He answered on the first ring. Vivienne. Someone was in the penthouse that morning. She kept her voice flat. Someone went through my bag and took my phone out while I was getting ready. I need you to tell me who had access. A pause, not a guilty pause. A working pause. She could hear him shifting into a different mode of thinking. What time did you leave? 8:40. Who was in the building that morning? That's what I'm asking you. I mean, who did you see? In the lobby? In the elevator? Anyone who shouldn't have been there? Vivienne thought back. The lobby had been quiet. Patrick at the desk. One of the cleaning crew near the service elevator. A woman she didn't recognize waiting near the mailboxes who had looked up when Vivienne came through and then looked back down at her phone. There was a woman near the mailboxes, she said. I didn't recognize her. Dark coat. Maybe 40. She heard Adrian typing something. I'll pull the lobby footage, he said, from before you left and after. Damien will want a copy. He'll have it within the hour. A pause. Vivienne, don't. I'm not. Whatever you're about to say, don't say it right now. Her voice was still flat, still controlled. Give me the footage. That's all I need from you right now. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. She ended the call. The footage arrived in Damien's inbox at 1:15, forwarded to Naomi 6 minutes later. Ruth, the silent associate, set up a laptop at the kitchen table and ran through the timestamp the lobby camera had on file for the morning in question. The three of them watched it, Vivienne, Naomi, Damien, with the kind of focused silence that belonged to people looking for something specific in ordinary footage. The woman in the dark coat appeared at 8:21. She came through the side entrance with a key card. She went to the mailboxes. She stood there for 4 minutes, not looking at anything in particular, her face angled away from the camera in a manner that was just slightly too consistent to be accidental. At 8:39, Vivienne appeared on the lobby footage, heading for the side entrance, bag over one shoulder, the box of books under her arm. She passed within 6 feet of the woman in the dark coat. The woman did not look up. At 8:42, Vivienne exited. At 8:44, the woman in the dark coat crossed the lobby to the private elevator. She typed a code. The elevator opened. She had the penthouse code, Naomi said. She had the penthouse code, Damien confirmed. Vivienne stared at the screen. How? Someone gave it to her. Damien leaned closer to the screen. Or she obtained it through Celeste. Celeste would have had access to the code as his executive assistant. He paused. Ruth, can you get a face enhance on the 8:44 timestamp? Ruth did something technical and the image sharpened marginally. The woman's face was still mostly angled away, but for one frame, as she stepped into the elevator, her chin was at a different angle and the camera caught the edge of her profile. Damien pulled out his phone and photographed the screen. "I know someone who can work with this," he said. The woman in the dark coat was in the elevator for 7 minutes. Then she came back through the lobby, through the side entrance, and out into the morning. She did not rush. She walked the way people walk when they have done exactly what they came to do. The identification came back at 4 o'clock. Her name was Petra Solano. She was 38. She had worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company that Damien's contact traced, in 4 steps, to the Kessler organization's financial infrastructure. She had 2 prior arrests and different names. She was currently not at any of the 3 addresses attached to her known identities. "They sent her to take my phone," Vivienne said. "To ensure you'd come back," Damien said. "And the person who called the building to make sure I noticed. Who was that?" "We don't know yet." "But it was coordinated." She looked at Damien. "They planned the whole morning. They knew my routine. They knew I volunteered on Tuesdays. They knew what time I left. They knew—" She stopped. "They had someone inside who told them all of that." "Yes." "Who?" Damien opened the folder again. He slid a single page across the table. "We can't confirm this yet. I want to be very clear that this is not confirmed. But the financial trail from the recruitment firm that hired Celeste runs through an account that also made 2 payments, small ones, the kind designed to look like routine transactions, to an account held by a man named Gil Tran." He paused. "Gil Tran is one of your husband's most senior lieutenants. He has been with the Vescari organization for 16 years. The kitchen went completely still. Naomi said nothing. Vivienne looked at the page, the numbers on it, the dates, the particular bureaucratic language of money, moving from one place to another with the intention of not being noticed. 16 years, she said. He was at the hospital when you registered your prenatal care. He coordinated the penthouse security rotation. He would have known your routines, your schedule, the access codes. Damien kept his voice level. He may not have known the full scope of what he was enabling, or he may have. We don't yet know. Does Adrian know? Naomi asked. Not yet, Damien said. This information has not been shared with Adrian's team. That is a decision Vivienne needs to make. Both of them looked at her. She sat with it. 16 years. A man who had been in Adrian's organization longer than she had known Adrian existed. A man who had access to everything, the codes, the calendar, the quiet infrastructure of their daily life. A man who had potentially sat across a dinner table from them at organization events and eaten food, and made conversation and known exactly what was being built in the margins of their marriage. Tell him, she said. Naomi looked at her sharply. He needs to know, Vivienne said. Not because I'm protecting him. Because if there's someone inside his organization who helped engineer this and he doesn't know, then the threat doesn't end with Celeste being found. She held Naomi's gaze. And that threat doesn't stop at him. It stops at our daughter. Adrian received the information at 5:17 through Damien, who called Hargrove, who passed it up the chain in the compressed neutral language of legal communication. At 5:22, Marco called Adrian's private line. At 5:23, Gil Tran was unreachable. His phone was off. His apartment was empty. His car was in the Viscari building garage, which meant he'd either been picked up or he'd had enough warning to run without taking the obvious exit. In the Viscari organization, those were the only 2 options for a man who had been exposed. Adrian sat in his office and stared at the wall for a long time. He'd known Gil since the man was 30 years old. He'd promoted him 3 times. He'd been to his mother's funeral. He'd given his daughter a gift when she graduated college. A small, practical gift, the kind you gave when you wanted to indicate that you saw the person's actual life, not just their role in yours. 16 years. He picked up his phone and called Marco back. Find him, he said, before they do. Because if the Kessler organization had already moved to clean up their own exposure, Celeste found, Gil identified, then Gil Tran was not running. Gil Tran was already somewhere he'd never chosen to go. And the information he carried about the internal structure of the Viscari operation had either already been extracted or was about to be. There's something else, Marco said. Adrian waited. Voss is in the city. Dorian Voss. He flew in this morning on a private charter, registered under a company name that traces back to a Kessler holding. Marco's voice was careful. He's not here for a meeting, boss. There's no meeting. We don't know why he's here. Adrian stood up from his desk. He walked to the window, the same 42-floor view of a city that looked ordinary from up here. The rain had started again. It was the kind that came in low and steady, the kind that had no interest in being dramatic, the kind that simply intended to continue. "Where is she right now?" he said. "Your wife?" "Yes." "Capitol Hill, your sister-in-law's house." "The security rotation." "In place, 2 outside, 1 mobile." "Add 2 more. And I want someone on the clinic." He paused. "She has a prenatal appointment Thursday. I want eyes on every route she could take." "Understood." "And Marco." He kept looking at the rain. "Nobody moves on anything tonight without my direct order. Nobody reacts, nobody escalates, nobody does anything that could put her in the middle of a response. Understood?" "Understood." He hung up. He stood at the window for another long moment. Then he pulled out the personal phone and he looked at Vivienne's contact name for a while. Just looked at it, the name sitting there in the list, the one he'd typed in himself 6 years ago, with a feeling he hadn't known what to call at the time, and had since spent considerable energy refusing too closely. He didn't call. She had told him what she needed from him right now. The footage, the information, the practical machinery of protection, operating at a distance, invisible. He could do that. It was the least he could do, and it was the most she was asking, and the space between those two things was the exact width of everything he had broken. The knock at Naomi's door came at 8:15 that night. Not a knock. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, the kind with authority in them. Naomi checked the peephole. Then she looked at Vivienne. "It's a woman I don't recognize," she said quietly. "Alone. No car visible." Vivienne was on the couch with her feet up and a book she hadn't been reading open in her lap. She sat up slowly. "Don't open it," she said. "I'm not going to open it." Naomi picked up her phone and called the security rotation. The man who answered said he could see the woman clearly on the street camera. She'd walked up from the south end of the block. She'd been standing outside for 4 minutes before knocking. She was carrying something. "What is she carrying?" Naomi said. A pause. "An envelope," the man said. "Letter-sized. She's just holding it." Naomi and Vivienne looked at each other. 3 more knocks. Then a voice through the door. A voice that was ragged in a very specific way. The kind of ragged that belonged to someone who had been crying and had stopped and was now operating on the far side of it. "My name is Celeste Moreau," the voice said. "I know I'm the last person either of you want to see. I know I don't have any right to be here." A pause. A long one. "But I have something that can't be handed to a lawyer. It has to come from me directly. To her." Another pause. "Please." Vivienne was already on her feet. Naomi put a hand on her arm. She's alone," Vivienne said. "She's the one they hurt to get to me." She looked at her sister. "Open the door." Naomi held her gaze for a moment. Then she moved her hand. Then she opened the door. Celeste Moreau stood in the porch light, looking like the debris left behind by a version of herself that no longer existed. Her wrist was in a brace. A healing bruise ran the length of her left cheekbone. Her hair was pulled back in a way that was purely practical, no art in it. She was wearing clothes that were slightly too large, the kind borrowed from someone in a hurry. She looked at Vivienne. And for the first time since the bedroom doorway, the first time since Celeste had met her eyes with that steady, wine-glass calm, Vivienne saw something in her face that was entirely different. Not guilt, not fear. Something past both of those. "I'm sorry," Celeste said. Not performed, not strategic. The flat, exhausted kind of sorry that has been carried too long to be anything other than what it is. "That's not enough. I know it's not enough. But I needed to say it to your face before I give you this." She held out the envelope. "Because you deserve to know that I know what I cost you, even if I couldn't stop it." Vivienne took the envelope. She did not open it yet. She held it and looked at Celeste, and she said nothing for a moment. "Come inside," she said. Naomi made a sound. "Come inside," Vivienne said again. "You look like you haven't eaten." Celeste's jaw moved. The muscles in her throat worked. She blinked once, rapidly, and then she got it under control, and she nodded, and she stepped inside. Vivienne turned the envelope over in her hands. On the back, in handwriting that was small and precise, someone had written a single line. "Everything Voss told me to find out, and what I found instead." She opened it. Inside was a folded document. She unfolded it. The first line told her what it was. A sworn recorded confession, notarized, date stamped, with attachments, photographs, communication logs. The financial records of 2 years of orchestrated betrayal laid out in the specific, unambiguous language of someone who has decided that the only currency they have left is the truth. The last page was a single handwritten note, separate from the legal document. It said, he tried to end it 3 times. The third time, Voss sent someone to his mother's address in Genoa. After that, he stopped trying. I'm telling you this not to excuse him. I'm telling you because you should know that the man who stood in that bedroom was not the man they set out to trap. He was what was left of him after they were done. Vivienne read it twice. She folded it back along its original lines and put it in the envelope and held the envelope in both hands. Outside, the rain kept falling in its quiet, indifferent way. And somewhere in the city, Dorian Voss was in a hotel room, or a car, or a building that she didn't know the name of, having arrived that morning for a reason that nobody had yet identified, while the man whose organization he had spent 2 years methodically dismantling from the inside was 42 floors above the skyline trying to protect a woman and a child from consequences he had set in motion by simply being who he was. And Vivienne stood in her sister's entryway with a confession in her hands and a baby pressing against her ribs and the specific exhaustion of a person who has been surviving on controlled breathing for 11 days. And she understood with perfect, terrible clarity that the moment she had thought was the end, the moment in the elevator, the doors closing, the escape she had built for herself and her daughter, had never been an ending at all. It had been the moment the real danger began, and none of them had known it until now, and now was already too late to go back and know it sooner. Vivienne was still holding the envelope when Naomi's phone rang. Not the landline, the cell. The one Naomi kept face up on the kitchen counter because she was a woman who believed in being reachable and had built a career on never missing the call that mattered. It rang at 8:41, and the name on the screen was the security contractor, not the one posted outside, the mobile unit. And Naomi answered it before the second ring had finished. She listened for 11 seconds. Vivienne watched her sister's face change. It didn't collapse. Naomi's face never collapsed, but there was a recalibration, a visible, rapid reorganization of priorities that Vivienne had only seen once before, years ago, when their father had called from the hospital and Naomi had answered and received the news and then stood in the middle of a parking lot and become, in the space of 30 seconds, a completely different version of herself, the version that dealt with things. How many? Naomi said. A pause. How far out? Another pause. Get them inside, all of them, now. She hung up. She looked at Celeste first. You were followed. Celeste went very still. I was careful. I switched 3 cars. I walked the last 6 blocks. You were followed. Naomi was already moving toward the hallway closet. There are 2 vehicles that weren't on this block an hour ago, dark SUVs. They parked in opposite directions. She pulled out a go bag that Vivienne had not known existed, a compact black duffel that looked like it had been packed deliberately, not hastily. My contractor says they've been sitting with the engines off for 12 minutes. Celeste's face had gone the color of old paper. Voss? She said. Who else? Naomi set the bag on the hallway table and looked at Vivienne. We need to move. Move where? Vivienne said. I'm 8 months pregnant, Naomi. I can't. I know what you are. Naomi's voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who had already done the math and was now executing the result. There's a car in the alley behind the house. My contractor is bringing it around right now. You're going to the clinic. The clinic is closed. Dr. Yoon has emergency privileges at Swedish Medical. I called her 20 minutes ago. She stopped, looked at Vivienne. I called her when Damien told me Voss was in the city. I've been waiting to see if I was wrong. She picked up the bag. I wasn't wrong. Celeste said, They're not here for her. Both of them looked at her. They're here for me, Celeste said. The confession. If that document gets filed. She stopped, swallowed. Voss knows I went somewhere tonight. He doesn't know where, but he'll have triangulated the route by now. This is the logical endpoint. Her voice was flat and steady, in the way of someone managing terror through precision. If you move her, they'll follow. If you stay here with me, they have no reason to come through the door. That Naomi said, is not a plan I'm willing to implement. I'm not asking you to stay, I'm saying I'll stay. Celeste looked at Vivienne. Let me do one thing right. I'll stay here with enough noise to keep their attention on this address while you get her out. The hallway was very quiet. Vivienne looked at Celeste. The bruised cheekbone, the borrowed clothes, the wrist brace, the face of a woman who had been used as an instrument and was now trying to decide what to do with what was left of her own agency. No, Vivienne said. Vivienne, she comes with us. Vivienne looked at her sister. All of us. Together. Naomi held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then she turned to the back of the house. Then we go now. The contractor's name was Reyes. She was compact and fast-moving, and she came through the back door at 8:46 with the energy of someone who had assessed the situation before entering the room and had already made several decisions. 2 vehicles out front, she said without preamble. A third just parked on the north corner. They're setting a perimeter. She looked at Vivienne. We have maybe 4 minutes before they close the alley. 4 minutes, Naomi said. Less if they're moving already. Vivienne was putting on her coat. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed this with a distant kind of curiosity. Some part of her brain had apparently decided that shaking was a luxury the current situation did not permit, and had simply withdrawn the option. She got the coat on. She picked up her bag. She looked at Celeste. Can you move? Yes. Your wrist? I can move. Reyes opened the back door. The alley was wet and dark, and smelled like rain-soaked concrete and the particular urban smell of a city that doesn't fully sleep. A gray sedan was idling 30 feet down, headlights off, exhaust visible in the cold air. They moved. Vivienne moved faster than she'd moved in 2 months, the baby's weight redistributing with each step in a way that her body had learned to compensate for, but that was not designed for this speed on this surface. Naomi had her hand, not holding her back, clearing the path, one hand extended to catch whatever came. They were 10 feet from the car when the lights came on. Not the sedan. The alley entrance on the north end. A vehicle had pulled across it, headlights on full, and in the sudden harsh light the alley became a stage, and all 4 of them were standing in the middle of it. Reyes put herself between the light and Vivienne without being asked. A door opened. A man got out of the blocking vehicle. He was not large in a threatening way. He was medium everything, the kind of person designed to be forgotten, which in Vivienne's experience was its own specific kind of threatening. Ms. Moreau, he said. His voice carried across the alley with no effort, the voice of someone accustomed to being heard. Nobody else needs to be involved in this. Celeste made a sound, not a word, just a sound. The document, the man said, and you come with us. Everyone else goes home. Reyes said quietly, directly to Vivienne, Get in the car. They were blocking south end. Get in the car and lock it. Naomi was already moving, pulling Vivienne toward the sedan, and Vivienne went because her sister's hand was on her arm, and her sister's voice was in her ear saying, Move, just move, and she moved. She got to the sedan, and Naomi got the door open, and Vivienne got in, and the door closed, and she immediately turned to look back through the rear window. Reyes was talking to the man in the alley, not confrontationally, positioning, buying seconds, the practiced body language of someone creating space through conversation. Celeste was standing 6 feet behind Reyes, not moving. Vivienne's phone rang. Adrian, she answered it. I know, he said. I have eyes on the alley. Don't get out of that car. My people have had a mobile unit on your block since Tuesday. I know about Voss's vehicles. I have people 60 seconds out. His voice was controlled, but there was something running underneath it, something with velocity. 60 seconds. Can you stay in the car for 60 seconds? Celeste is still in the alley. A pause. Brief. I know. Adrian, 60 seconds, Vivienne. She held the phone and watched through the rear window. The man in the alley took a step forward. Reyes moved to match it, a single, precise lateral step that didn't look aggressive but effectively narrowed his angle. He stopped. Said something Vivienne couldn't hear. Celeste reached into her coat. Vivienne's heart stopped. But what Celeste pulled out was not a weapon. It was a phone. Her own phone. She held it up so the man could see the screen. Could see, presumably, something on the screen. And she said something that made the man go very still. Then the north end of the alley erupted with light and sound. Two vehicles came in fast from the street. Not the Kessler vehicles, different ones. And even from 60 feet away and through a rain-spotted window, Vivienne could see that the men who got out of them moved with the specific coordinated purpose of people who had been told exactly where to be and exactly what to do when they got there. The man from the blocking vehicle made a calculation. He got back in his vehicle and reversed out of the alley in the time it took Vivienne to exhale. She didn't stop shaking until they were inside Swedish Medical. The shaking arrived in the elevator, which was a delayed reaction that Dr. Yoon later told her was completely normal. The body holds itself together through the threat and releases through the aftermath, and the release is not polite about its timing. Vivienne stood in the hospital elevator with Naomi's arm around her shoulders and her own hand flat on her stomach, and she shook for about 90 seconds, and then it stopped. Dr. Yoon was waiting on the third floor. She asked no questions about the alley or the men or the hour. She asked about contractions, about blood pressure, about fetal movement. She was the most grounding presence in the building, and she knew it, and she used it deliberately. "Lie down," she said. "Right now. Everything else waits." Vivienne lay down. The monitor showed the baby's heartbeat, fast, steady, a sound like a small, insistent argument being made by something that had not yet learned to doubt itself. Vivienne listened to it and felt something in her chest that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. Naomi was outside the room making calls. Vivienne could hear her voice through the door. The cadences of it, the compression of a woman handling 4 things simultaneously. Damien. Reyes. Someone she called by last name only. The specific musical quality of her sister doing what her sister did. Celeste sat in the corner of the room. She'd come in with them. Nobody had told her to, and nobody had told her not to. And she'd simply followed through the hospital entrance and into the elevator and into the room. And she sat in the corner chair with her braced wrist on her knee and her eyes on the floor, and she stayed out of the way in the manner of someone who understood exactly how much space they were entitled to take up. Vivienne looked at her. "The phone," she said. "In the alley. What was on it?" Celeste looked up. A live upload, the confession. Everything in that envelope was already uploading to a server Damien's team controls the moment I handed it to you. She paused. Voss's man could take the physical document. He couldn't take back what was already sent. Vivienne processed this. "You planned that before you came to the house?" "Yes." "You knew they might follow you?" "I thought it was likely." Celeste's voice was steady. "I wanted to give you the original in person. I needed you to have heard it from me directly before it became a legal document that attorneys argue over." She looked at her hands. "The rest I could manage." "You put yourself in the alley on purpose." A pause. "I put myself in the alley so you could get to a car," Celeste said. "That's a different thing." Vivienne looked at the ceiling. The baby's heartbeat continued its steady percussion on the monitor. Outside the room, Naomi's voice rose briefly on a point and then came back down. "I don't forgive you," Vivienne said. "I know. I understand what happened to you. That's not the same thing. I know that too. But," Vivienne stopped, found the word. "Thank you for the alley." Celeste nodded once. She looked back at the floor. She was done taking up space. Adrian arrived at the hospital at 10:19. He did not come to the room. He stood at the end of the third-floor corridor. Vivienne could see him through the narrow window set into the room door, and he spoke to Naomi for several minutes. Naomi's body language was not warm. It was not hostile either. It was the carefully constructed neutrality of a woman setting aside her personal position in order to receive information she needed. He looked toward the room once, just once. He looked at the door, at the small window in it, and then he looked away and kept talking to Naomi. Vivienne turned back to the ceiling. Dr. Yoon came in at 10:30. "Baby's good," she said, in the specific shorthand she used when the news was genuinely fine and not being softened. "Blood pressure is elevated, but not alarmingly. I want you here tonight." "Okay?" "Not negotiating, just telling you." I said okay. Dr. Yoon made a note. "There's a man in the corridor who would like to know how you are." Vivienne said nothing. "I'm not advocating for him," Dr. Yoon said. "I'm telling you he's there. What you do with that information is your business." She left. Vivienne lay there for a while. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Celeste had fallen asleep in the corner chair with her head against the wall and her braced wrist cradled against her chest. And there was something about the sight of her, the absolute exhaustion of it, the way sleep had stripped everything else away and left behind something that just looked like a person, an ordinary tired person, that Vivienne couldn't look away from for a moment. Then she swung her legs over the side of the bed. I was still in the corridor. He was standing with his back against the wall and his arms at his sides, and he looked like a man who had decided that the only position available to him right now was to wait, and that he intended to do it without making any demands about how long. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on that morning. There was a cut above his left eye that had been handled but not well. The kind of field management that got applied when someone didn't want to stop moving. His knuckles on his right hand were swollen. He looked at her, and he didn't move. She stood in the corridor in a hospital gown, and her coat thrown over the top of it, and her bare feet in the too cold hospital hallway, and she looked back at him. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's not mine." He paused. "Some of it is mine." "The parking structure," she said. Reyes told Naomi. "It's handled." "Voss, it's handled." He said it without inflection, not bragging, not minimizing, just the flat declarative of a man reporting a completed thing. She leaned against the wall opposite him. "You put people between my building and the alley without telling me," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" "Since Tuesday." She nodded slowly. "Your people were in the alley tonight." 60 seconds out, like I said." "They weren't 60 seconds out," she said. "They were there. They were already there. They were there before you called me." He didn't answer. "You were watching the alley in real time." A pause. "Yes." "Where were you watching it from?" He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "From a vehicle on the south end of the block." Something moved through her. Not anger. Something beneath anger. The thing anger comes from. "You were there," she said. "You were right there. I wasn't going to come to the door. I know you weren't going to come to the door." Her voice was quiet, but it had edges in it. "Adrian, you were sitting on the south end of the block in a car." He said nothing. "How many nights?" He looked at her. "How many nights have you been sitting outside in a car?" The corridor was very quiet. Down the hall, a nurse passed without looking at them. The monitor in Vivienne's room continued its steady sound through the door, audible in the silence. "Since you left," he said. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not because she was moved, because she was furious, and the fury needed somewhere to go that wasn't at him in a hospital corridor at 10:30 at night with her feet on cold linoleum. "You can't do that," she said. "I know." "You cannot—" She stopped, breathed. "You cannot sit outside my life in a car every night like you're keeping watch on something you still have rights to. You don't have rights to. I filed the I know what you filed. Then you know—" "I know." His voice cracked on the second word. Just slightly, like something structural giving way by a fraction. "I know all of it. I know what I don't have rights to. I know what I destroyed. I know that she was placed there, and I know that doesn't make it okay. And I know—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I know. Every part of it. And I sat in the car anyway because—" Another stop, longer this time. "Because it was the only thing I could do that wasn't nothing." Vivienne looked at him. He looked like a man who was holding himself together by sheer personal force and had been doing so for 11 days and was beginning to feel the cost of it in his body in ways he hadn't budgeted for. She thought about the coffee she'd drunk without saying anything. She thought about a Sunday morning and his ear against her stomach and words said quietly enough to require repeating. She thought about Celeste in the corner chair looking like nothing more than a tired person, and about a woman named Petra Solano who had gone through her bag while she was thinking about pencil grips, and about the specific cold arithmetic of people who sit in rooms and decide that love is a structural weakness worth targeting. She thought about all of it, and then she thought about her daughter. "She's okay," Vivienne said. She said it because it was the first thing, the most important thing. "The baby is fine, Dr. Yoon says tonight, and then we'll see." His face did something that she didn't have the precise vocabulary for and wasn't going to try to name. "Okay," he said. His voice was not entirely level. "Okay, good." She pushed off the wall. "Naomi is going to tell you everything that needs to happen next," she said. The legal process continues. Nothing changes about that. I know. And you can't. She stopped, looked at him. You can't sit in a car outside anymore. I know why you did it. I understand why you did it. But I need to know that my life is my life. Even if it's also dangerous right now. Even if you have better information about the danger than I do. She held his gaze. Especially then. He looked at her for a long moment. I'll coordinate through Naomi, he said. Security decisions go through her. You know everything. Every change, every update. Nothing happens without your knowledge. He paused. That's what I should have done from the beginning. Yes, she said. It is. She turned back toward the room. Vivienne. She stopped. Didn't turn around. I'm sorry. The two words came out stripped of everything. No framing, no context, no attempt to qualify them into something more manageable. Just the words. Not for what happened to us. Not for what they used. I'm sorry for every choice I made that gave them something to use. Every secret, every decision I made for both of us without asking. Every time I chose to manage instead of trust. A pause. I'm sorry for all of it. She stood in the corridor for a moment. She did not turn around. I know, she said, and she went back through the door. At 2 a.m, the hospital was its nighttime self, quieter, slower, running on the skeleton crew of people who chose the overnight hours or had simply been assigned them. Vivienne was not sleeping. Naomi had gone home at midnight to handle logistics, leaving 2 of Reyes's people in the corridor. Celeste had woken, assessed the situation with the clarity of someone who woke from exhaustion into immediate alertness, and had quietly excused herself with a contact number for Damien's team and the specific dignity of a woman who knew exactly how long she was welcome anywhere and left before that moment arrived. Vivienne lay in the adjustable hospital bed with the monitor humming and her hands on her stomach, and she looked at the ceiling and she listened to her daughter's heartbeat. And she thought. She thought about what Damien would do with the confession. She thought about Voss and whether handled meant what she suspected it meant and whether she needed to know more than that. She thought about Giltran and whether he was alive or not, and whether that too was handled, and whether the word handled was one she could continue to let exist at the edge of her life without examining it too directly. She thought about the petition sitting in the court system, about the custody framework, about the home she had been looking at listings for, a house, not a penthouse, a house with a garden and a room that got morning light and enough space for a child to grow in without feeling like she was always navigating someone else's scale. She thought about a man sitting in a car on the south end of a block for 11 nights. She thought about that last. She was still thinking about it when her body made the decision for her. The pain arrived at 2:17 in the morning with the specific authority of something that had been building for hours and had simply been waiting for the right moment to announce itself. Not gradual, not polite. A long, gripping wave of pressure that started low and spread and held, and then released and left her gasping at the ceiling. She pressed the call button. She pressed it again. A nurse appeared in 30 seconds, young, fast, with the controlled energy of someone who had trained specifically for the middle of the night. I think, Vivienne said, and had to stop and breathe through another wave that came faster than she'd expected. I think she's decided not to wait. The nurse was already at the monitor. I'm getting Dr. Yoon, she said. Please, Vivienne said. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach and she breathed and she felt, under the pain, around it, through the specific overwhelming physicality of a body doing something enormous. Her daughter moving. Not in distress. Moving with intention, with the same purposeful quality she'd had for weeks, as though she had simply made a decision and was acting on it without particular regard for the hour or the circumstances or the careful logistical plans of everyone involved. Her daughter, Vivienne thought, was going to be a lot of work. She almost smiled. Then Dr. Yoon came through the door moving quickly with 2 nurses behind her, and Vivienne stopped thinking about almost anything and started doing the thing that everything else had been building toward. Naomi arrived at 2:48. She came through the hospital entrance at a pace that was not quite running, but contained the architecture of running, and she made it to the 3rd floor in time to be told that it was progressing fast, faster than the standard for a first delivery, Dr. Yoon said, as though the baby had somewhere to be. She called Adrian from the waiting room. She did not think before she dialed. She dialed because it was the right thing to do, and because Naomi Hale, whatever her feelings about Adrian Viscari as a husband or a man, or an organizational entity, believed without compromise that a child deserved a father who showed up. Even if the father had forfeited every other right, he had not forfeited that one. He answered in 2 rings. "She's in labor," Naomi said. "Swedish Medical, 3rd floor." She paused. "Don't make me regret this call." She hung up. She sat in the waiting room chair with her hands clasped and her back straight, and she waited, which was not something she was naturally constituted for, but she did it with the same discipline she applied to everything else. Adrian drove. He drove the way he'd driven on the night they first met, some function at a waterfront venue, a mutual contact, a conversation that had started as professional and become something else by degrees. When he'd offered her a ride and she'd accepted with the careful assessment of a woman deciding in real time whether a stranger was trustworthy, and then apparently decided yes. And the drive across the bridge had taken 20 minutes, and he'd been paying attention to every word she said instead of the road, and they'd arrived and he hadn't wanted to get out of the car. He drove the same way now, too fast, too focused, the city going past the windows in the wet dark. He parked in the hospital structure at 3:04. He was walking toward the elevator when his phone went off. Not a call. A notification from the security system. He stopped. The parking structure's north entrance camera had triggered a motion alert. The timestamp was 30 seconds old. He looked at the notification for 1 second. Then he looked up at the structure around him, the concrete columns, the low ceiling, the inadequate lighting of a public parking facility at 3 in the morning. And he understood with the specific pre-verbal intelligence of a man who had survived 15 years in a world where threats arrived without announcements that he had made a mistake. He had come to the hospital alone. He had left his people on the south side of Capitol Hill, wrapped up the Voss situation, sent Marco home, and he had driven here alone because this was personal and he hadn't wanted anyone else in the car for it. And someone had known he would do exactly that. The footsteps came from his left. He turned. There were 3 of them, not Voss's men, different, the specific physical type of men assembled for a single purpose. And the one in front had the patient expression of someone who had been waiting in a parking structure for 2 hours and was entirely at peace with it. "Mr. Vescari," he said, "Mr. Kessler would like 5 minutes of your time." Adrian looked at the 3 of them. He looked at the elevator behind him. He thought about the 3rd floor, about Dr. Yoon, about a monitor beeping in a room where something irreplaceable was happening without him. 5 minutes, the man said again. And Adrian Vescari, who had built an empire on never showing the full content of his intentions, smiled at the man in the way that people who didn't know him sometimes mistook for cooperation, and said nothing at all. And then he moved. He moved faster than a man in a dress shirt had any right to, because Adrian Vescari had not maintained control of a criminal organization for 15 years, by being only what he appeared to be in a room, and the first man went down before he'd finished processing that the conversation was over, and the second caught him across the shoulder with something that sent a hot white pain through his left side, and he registered it and filed it under later and kept moving, because the elevator was 20 feet away, and his daughter was being born on the 3rd floor, and there was no version of the next 5 minutes in which he was not in that building. He hit the elevator button with a bloody hand. The doors opened. He got in. He pressed 3. As the doors closed, he could see one of the 3 men getting up from the concrete floor, and he could feel the specific wet heat of something in his left side that was not sweat. And he stood in the elevator and breathed and looked at the numbers changing above the door. 1, 2. He pressed his right hand flat against the wall to stay vertical. 3. The doors opened. He walked out onto the 3rd floor of Swedish Medical at 3:11 in the morning, and Naomi was in the waiting room chair, and she stood up when she saw him, and her face did something complicated when she took in the full picture of him. "What happened to you?" she said. "Parking structure," he said. His voice was level. "Is she still going?" Naomi was already looking at the blood spreading through the left side of his shirt. "Adrian, is she okay?" "She's okay. Then I'm fine," he said. "I'm fine." He sat down in the waiting room chair beside his estranged wife's sister, and he pressed his right hand against his left side, and he breathed with the specific controlled precision of a man who has decided that the body does not get to make this decision, and outside the window. Seattle was beginning its earliest gray of approaching morning, and somewhere down that corridor his daughter was arriving into the world, at a speed and on a schedule entirely her own, indifferent to everything that had built itself around her, and through no fault of her own, just Naomi saw the blood first. Not the cut above his eye, which had reopened somewhere between the parking structure and the elevator, and had dried in a dark line down the side of his face. The blood on his shirt, the left side, spreading in the specific unhurried way of something that was not stopping on its own. She stood up from the waiting room chair and she looked at him for one full second with the expression of a woman rapidly calculating the difference between what she felt about him personally and what the situation required of her professionally, and then she went to the nurse's station. "I need someone to look at this man," she said. "Now." The nurse who came was the same young one from Vivienne's room, and she took one look at Adrian's left side and said something into her radio that brought two more people in under a minute. They sat him down. They cut the shirt. Naomi stood 6 feet away with her arms crossed and watched them work. And she did not look away when they cleaned the wound. And she did not say anything when Adrian's jaw tightened against the pain and his breathing went shallow and controlled. A laceration. Deep but contained. The kind made by something with an edge, not a bullet, which was the first thing the younger nurse had visibly braced for, but a blade. The attending who arrived at 3:20 examined it with the focused calm of someone who had worked the overnight shift at a Seattle hospital long enough to have seen most categories of damage the human body could absorb. "You need stitches," he said. "How many?" 8, maybe 10. "How long?" 20 minutes if you hold still." Adrian looked at the corridor that led toward the delivery rooms. The attending followed his gaze. "She's not out yet," Naomi said from across the room. She said it without inflection, just information. "Then do it," Adrian said. He held still. They finished at 3:41. He sat with his repaired left side and a clean dressing and the borrowed scrub top. The attending had produced from somewhere, and he looked at the waiting room around him. The institutional chairs, the low lighting, the small television mounted in the corner with the sound off showing a weather segment about a front moving in from the coast. And he breathed carefully because the stitches reminded him to be careful every time he didn't. Naomi sat down in the chair beside him. Not across the room. Beside him. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said, "for calling me." "I called you for her," Naomi said, "and for the baby. Not for you." "I know." "I want to be clear about that." "You're very clear," he said. "You've always been very clear. It's one of the things I respect about you that I never told you." Naomi looked at the television. The weather segment had given way to a segment about something else. "You could have told someone you were coming alone tonight. You could have had people here." "Yes." "That was stupid." "Yes." "The parking structure." She paused. "Kessler's people?" "One of them. The rest were cleanup crew. Loose ends." He shifted slightly, registered the stitches, stopped shifting. "It's done. The organization that spent 2 years inside my marriage is done. That's over." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "Gil Tran." "In federal custody as of 11 o'clock tonight. Damien's contact arranged the handoff." He looked at his hands, the swollen knuckles, the cut across the right palm that nobody had gotten to yet. He cooperated. He was scared and he made bad decisions for bad reasons, and he cooperated. That's the most charitable read I have of him, and I'm choosing to keep it. "And Voss." A pause. "Voss is a federal problem now," he said. "He walked into a situation tonight that he was not prepared for, and the people who were prepared for it made an arrangement that benefits everyone except him." He looked at the corridor. "He'll spend the rest of his life in a room that isn't his." Naomi absorbed this. She had the quality of a woman processing legal implications at a speed that most people couldn't match, identifying the parts that were her concern and the parts that were not, filing accordingly. "Celeste's confession," she said. "Damien has it. It's filed. It's on record." He paused. "Whatever the legal process does with it is the legal process's business. I'm not asking for anything from it." Naomi looked at him then. Really looked. The way she had not permitted herself to do since the night Vivienne had appeared at her door, because looking directly at Adrian Viscari had always required her to acknowledge that the situation was more complicated than she wanted it to be, and she had not wanted complicated. She had wanted clear lines and correct positions and the clean satisfaction of being right. "You're not going to fight the petition," she said. "No." "Or the custody terms?" "No." Even the supervised visitation clause in the preliminary draft. He looked at her. I read it. The clause is reasonable given the circumstances of the last month. He held her gaze. It's reasonable given the last 2 years. I'm not going to argue with reasonable. Naomi looked back at the television. They sat in silence for a moment. She won't take you back, Naomi said. Not unkindly, just clearly. I know. Even with everything Celeste said, even with the confession and the trust fund and all of it. She filed that petition when she understood exactly who you are and what you cost her. She doesn't make decisions and unmake them. She gets that from you, Adrian said. Something shifted in Naomi's face, almost imperceptible. The kind of shift that happens when a person receives an accurate observation they weren't prepared for. Yes, she said. She does. It's a good quality, he said. I know that now. I didn't know how to live with it before. The corridor was quiet. Down the hall, a door opened and closed. A nurse moved past the waiting room entrance without stopping. I'm not trying to get her back, Adrian said. He said it to the wall in front of him, not to Naomi. I want to be clear about that too. I'm not all of this, the security, showing up tonight. I'm not doing it to rebuild a case for myself. He paused. I'm doing it because she is the mother of my daughter, and she deserved protection from things I set in motion by existing, and the least I could do was make sure those things couldn't reach her. He stopped. That's all. Naomi said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, she read the handwritten note from Celeste about the 3 times. He went very still. She didn't say anything about it to me, Naomi continued. She folded it back up and put it in the envelope, and she hasn't mentioned it, but she read it twice. She paused. I'm not telling you this as information you can use. I'm telling you because you've been sitting here with 10 stitches in your side, and you look like a man who believes he deserves every bad thing that's happened tonight, and I have exactly this much compassion left for you at 4 in the morning. She held up 2 fingers a centimeter apart. This much, so don't waste it. He looked at her hand. He looked at the corridor. He nodded once. At 4:17, Dr. Yoon came down the corridor. She walked with the pace of someone tired but satisfied, the particular energy of a person who has shepherded something important to its correct conclusion. She stopped at the waiting room entrance. She looked at Adrian, the scrub top, the dressing on his side, the general condition of him. And she did not ask questions. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, she said, 19 inches. She came fast and she came loud, and both of them are completely fine. Adrian stood up. The stitches reminded him. He stood up anyway. Can I? He stopped. Dr. Yoon looked at him for a moment, measuring something. I'll ask, she said. She went back down the corridor. Naomi stood beside him, and they waited in the particular silence of 2 people who have said the things that needed saying and have arrived at the other side of them. Dr. Yoon came back. Room 7, she said. 5 minutes, and I am counting. The room was dim. The overhead light was off, just the low, warm light from the wall panel that the night nurse had adjusted to something livable. It smelled like the specific aftermath of effort, antiseptic and something warmer underneath, the smell of a room where something physical and enormous had just occurred. Vivienne was in the bed. She was exhausted in a way that went all the way to the cellular level. He could see it in the particular quality of her stillness, the way her body had surrendered to the mattress with a completeness that was different from ordinary tiredness. Her hair was damp, her eyes were open. She was holding their daughter against her chest. Adrian stopped just inside the door. He had been in rooms where the stakes were absolute. He had negotiated from positions of genuine danger. He had made decisions with consequences he carried in his body still. He was not a man unfamiliar with moments that demanded everything. This was different from all of them. The baby was very small against Vivienne's chest. She had dark hair, more than most newborns, a fact that seemed somehow characteristic already, as though she had arrived with opinions. And her eyes were closed, and her fist was curled against her cheek, and she was breathing with the absolute unconscious confidence of something that had not yet been told about the world. Vivienne looked at him. She took in the scrub top, the dressing, the cut on his face that had dried to a thin, dark line. The parking structure, she said. Naomi told you. Dr. Yoon told me. Naomi told me the rest. She looked at him with the specific measuring quality she'd always had. Not suspicious, just honest, just seeing him as he actually was, and not as she wished him to be. Is it done? Yes. All of it. Yes. He held her gaze. Voss. The organization. Gil. All of it is done. There's no one left who has a reason to come for her. He looked at the baby. She's safe. That's... His voice stopped for a moment, and he let it stop and didn't fight it. That's what I came to tell you. Vivienne was quiet. Come closer, she said. He crossed the room. He stopped at the bedside and he looked down at his daughter, and she was so small that the fact of her felt almost impossible. Not metaphorically, literally impossible. The way certain true things feel when you encounter them for the first time in the physical world instead of the abstract. She doesn't have a name yet, Vivienne said. He looked at her. I couldn't name her without you here, she said. She said it simply, not as a concession or an offering, just as a fact about herself that she had apparently decided to be honest about. It felt wrong. He sat down in the chair beside the bed, carefully, because of the stitches, with the deliberate movement of a man managing damage, and he looked at his daughter. What were you thinking? He said. Alara, she said. I've been thinking Alara for 2 months. I didn't tell you because... She stopped. Because everything, he thought. Because they hadn't been in a place where names were shared. Because... Alara, he said. The name sat in the dim room like something that had been there the whole time and had simply been waiting for someone to say it. It's good, he said. I know it's good, Vivienne said. I've been thinking about it for 2 months. He almost smiled. He felt the almost of it, the muscles involved, the reflex of it. He didn't let it land because this was not a room for almost smiling, but he felt it. Alara shifted against her mother's chest. A tiny, sovereign movement. Her fist uncurled and curled again. She's going to be stubborn, Adrian said. She's going to be exactly as stubborn as she needs to be, Vivienne said. He nodded. He looked at his daughter's face. He looked at the dark hair and the closed eyes, and the particular set of her small mouth, which was, he saw this, and it did something to him that he did not have words for, Vivienne's mouth. The same line, the same quality of containment. I'm going to do what I said, he told Vivienne. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was looking at Alara. The custody terms. Whatever Damien and your attorney agree on, I'm going to do all of it without argument. He paused. And the other things. The organization. I've been working on it for months. The restructuring, moving the legitimate assets forward and closing the rest down in a way that doesn't leave anyone in a worse position than I found them. He paused again. It's going to take time, but I started it before any of this. I want you to know that. I'm not doing it as a performance. I started it because... He stopped, found the words that were true. Because I knew that the kind of life I was running was not a life I wanted her to grow up inside. Vivienne was looking at him now. I know, she said. Damien found the initial restructuring filings. He told me. He looked at her. 3 months ago, she said. Before I even knew there was anything wrong. You'd already started. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Her hand moved slowly on Alara's back, a small, automatic gesture, the kind that had already become instinct in the space of a single hour. That doesn't fix anything, she said. I know. It matters, she said, but it doesn't fix the thing that's broken. I know that too. She looked at their daughter. He looked at their daughter. She's going to need you, Vivienne said. Not the organization, not the money, not the empire or whatever is left of it. She's going to need her father to show up. She looked at him. That's it. That's the whole requirement. Everything else I can manage. I'll show up, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, measuring, deciding. Then she said, I know you will. And she meant it. He could hear that she meant it. Not as forgiveness, not as a door opening, but as an honest assessment of the man sitting beside her with 10 stitches in his side, who had spent 11 days in a car outside her sister's house, because it was the only thing available to him that wasn't nothing. She knew he would show up. That was what she had decided. Dr. Yoon appeared in the doorway. Time, she said. Adrian stood. He stood carefully, and he looked at Alara one more time, the hair, the fist, the mouth that was Vivienne's. And he did not reach for her because she was not his to reach for tonight, and he knew it, and he was the kind of man who had finally learned the difference between what was his and what he simply wanted. "I'll call Damien in the morning," he said. "I know," Vivienne said. He walked to the door. He stopped. He did not turn around. "She looks like you," he said. A pause. Just a beat. "She looks like herself," Vivienne said. "That's the point." He nodded. He walked out. The months that followed did not arrange themselves into a clean narrative. That was the truth of it. The afterward was not cinematic. It was a series of ordinary days and difficult ones, and occasionally impossible ones, laid end to end without the courtesy of a clear arc. Vivienne moved into the house she'd found the listings for. It was in Eastlake, 3 blocks from the water, with a garden that needed work and a room that got morning light, and a kitchen that was hers in the specific way that spaces become yours when nobody else has claims on them. She painted the kitchen herself, slowly, with Naomi holding the tape and making observations about her technique. And she chose a pale yellow that everyone told her was too cheerful, and which she found every morning to be exactly right. Alara came home at 4 days old. She was immediately and obviously a person with positions. She had opinions about light levels, and about the particular blanket with the yellow stitching, and about being put down when she hadn't indicated readiness to be put down. She expressed all positions loudly and without diplomacy. She slept in 3-hour increments that she selected herself without consultation. Vivienne loved her with the specific, unglamorous, round-the-clock intensity of someone who had been prepared to love something and then discovered that preparation and the actual thing had essentially nothing to do with each other. Her mother came from Spokane for 2 weeks. She and Vivienne repaired quietly and without ceremony the small accumulated damages of the previous 2 years, not with a conversation about them, but by cooking together in the yellow kitchen and watching Alara sleep and sitting on the back porch in the October cold drinking coffee that was not as bad as Adrian's had been. Naomi came every Sunday. She brought food she had not cooked herself and legal updates she delivered with the same tone as the food, and she held Alara with the focused competence of a woman who approached everything, including infants, as a task to be done correctly. And Alara permitted this without complaint, which Vivienne took as evidence that her daughter had good judgment. Damien Cross filed the final divorce decree on a Thursday in December. Vivienne was at the literacy center when the notification came through. She read it standing in the parking lot with one hand in her coat pocket and Alara strapped to her chest in the carrier, the baby's head tucked under her chin, warm and solid and entirely unconscious of the legal milestone being recorded in her immediate vicinity. She stood there for a moment. The notification said everything it needed to say in the flat, procedural language of finalized legal documents. It listed names and dates and the distribution of assets and the terms of custody and all the apparatus by which 2 lives once joined were formally unjoined. It was thorough, it was fair, it was exactly what she had asked for. She put her phone back in her pocket. She pressed her hand to the back of Alara's head, warm, covered in the same dark hair that had survived the hospital and the car seat and 3 weeks of being in the world, and she went back inside to finish the session. Adrian showed up on a Sunday in January. He had been showing up on Sundays since November, not to Vivienne's house, but to wherever Damien's agreed custody arrangement specified. A neutral location for the first months, until everyone had calibrated what the new shape of things looked like. A coffee shop with a back room that the owner, a woman named Susie, who asked no questions, made available. A park on the days when Seattle offered the specific gift of winter sun. Vivienne handed Alara over and went home and used the 4 hours to write. She had been writing for 2 months. Not a journal, not a diary, something longer. Something that had started as notes to herself and had gradually become the kind of document that had an argument to make, that moved from one place to another with intention. About the year. About the marriage and the decisions she'd made inside it. About what it meant to love someone and simultaneously allow yourself to be managed by them. About the specific loneliness of living inside a life that was technically complete. She was not sure yet what it was going to be. She was sure that it was the most honest thing she had ever written and that she was not ready for anyone to read it, and that both of those things were exactly right for where she was. She wrote at the kitchen table with the morning light coming in the way she'd planned it when she chose the room, and she found that the yellow was in fact exactly right. And she wrote until her back complained, and then she stopped and made tea and looked at the garden through the kitchen window. And she thought about what she was building here, what the shape of it was, what it was going to look like in a year, in 5 years, in the years when Ilara was old enough to come home from somewhere and tell her things she didn't expect to hear. She thought she was going to be okay at that. She thought she might even be good at it. In March, Adrian submitted the first set of restructuring documents to the state attorney's office. It was a process that would take years. Damien had told her as much, not because she'd asked, but because he believed she deserved to know the shape of the world Ilara was growing up in. The legitimate consolidation of the Viscari assets. The charitable foundation, structured around legal advocacy and housing support for women leaving violent situations. The quiet, unglamorous, procedurally correct dismantling of the machinery that had made Adrian Viscari dangerous and powerful and fundamentally incompatible with a life like the one Vivienne was building in Eastlake. He did it without press, without an announcement, without any of the theater that powerful men usually required when they performed their own redemptions. He just did it. She heard about it from Damien, and she noted it, and she did not call Adrian to say anything about it, because it was not the kind of thing that required a call. It was the kind of thing that required years of doing, and he was doing it, and that was the whole of it. The afternoon in the garden happened in May. Ilara was 7 months old and had recently discovered that the transition from sitting to crawling was something she could accomplish with sufficient application of will, and she was in the garden applying will to a dandelion that had survived Vivienne's most recent attempt at the flower beds. She grabbed it. She examined it with the focused intensity of a scientist encountering new data. She put it in her mouth. Vivienne removed it. Ilara expressed a position about this. Adrian was sitting in the garden chair that had appeared in March, not purchased by him, she'd bought it herself, but she'd set it there with the specific intention of there being somewhere for a person to sit other than the ground, because the custody arrangement had evolved naturally to include occasional Sunday afternoons in the garden when the weather was reasonable, which in Seattle meant infrequent but reliable. He was watching Ilara with the particular quality of attention he gave her, total, unhurried, the attention of a man who had decided that the hours he was given were not to be managed but to be spent. He had changed, and he had not changed in the ways that would have made things simple. I was still the man he'd been, still contained, still careful, still running the specific intelligence of someone who had survived by knowing more than he revealed. But there was something different in the quality of it, something that had space in it, something that was not always calculating the next position. Ilara reached for the dandelion again. He picked it up before she could get it and held it out of reach with the patient authority of someone who had learned which battles were worth the protest and which were simply physics. Ilara looked at him. She grabbed his finger instead. He looked at her hand around his finger, her complete unconscious claim on him. And his face did the thing it did when he thought nobody was looking at him directly. Not happiness, exactly. Not any one thing. The expression of a man encountering something true about himself that he had not expected. Vivienne was looking at him directly. He looked up. They held it for a moment, the specific eye contact of two people who had been through something that had no clean category and had arrived on the other side of it, at a place that also had no clean category. Not friends, not enemies, not what they had been, not nothing. Something that had been built out of the rubble of something else, which was its own kind of thing and had its own kind of weight. "She's going to walk early," he said. "She's already furious that she can't. She's 7 months old. She doesn't care." Vivienne looked at her daughter, the dark hair, the determined expression, the hand still closed around Adrian's finger while she considered her next move. And she felt the complicated truth of the afternoon settle around her. The yellow kitchen behind her, the water 3 blocks away. The document she was writing that was slowly becoming something she might actually let someone read someday. The man in the garden chair who had made terrible choices for reasons that included love and included cowardice and included 15 years of building a life that was structurally incompatible with trust and who was dismantling it piece by piece without asking for credit. She didn't forgive him. That was still true. Forgiveness was not the thing that the afternoon was about. The afternoon was about a dandelion and a 7-month-old who had inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's stillness, and who belonged to both of them, and to neither of them, and most importantly to herself. The afternoon was about this garden and this light, and the specific ordinary fact of a Saturday in May, when nobody was in danger and nothing was ending, and the work of building something was just quietly, unremarkably continuing. She looked back at Adrian. "She's going to walk before 9 months," she said. "I'll bet you." He looked at Alara, who was now attempting to use his hand as a surface to push herself upright. "What are we betting?" "If she walks before 9 months, you have to tell my mother you're sorry. In person. In Spokane." He looked at her. "And if she doesn't?" "She will," Vivienne said. He considered the garden, the dandelion. Alara's expression of pure focused determination. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Alara pushed against his hand and got 1 foot under her and failed and sat back down hard on the garden path and looked at the circumstance of it with the assessment of someone making note of the relevant variables. Then she tried again. The memoir was published 18 months later. It was called What I Left Behind, and it was about a woman who had confused the architecture of safety for love, and who had learned the difference at considerable cost, and who had built something new from what remained. It was not a story about a villain. It was not a story about a victim. It was a story about a person who had been asleep to certain things about herself and had been woken up, badly and without mercy, and had chosen to stay awake. It sold more copies than Vivienne had imagined it would. She got letters, hundreds of them, and then more. From women in situations that rhymed with hers in different keys, from women in situations she had never imagined, from some men, fewer, who wrote about recognizing themselves in the parts of the book that described what it looked like to love someone while simultaneously refusing to believe they were a full person. She answered as many as she could. Naomi's firm became what Naomi had always intended it to become, a place that good attorneys with particular commitments went to do the work that mattered. She had 3 partners now, and a reputation that was not soft, and which she had not tried to make soft, and which brought in the cases she wanted to take. She came to the garden on Sundays when she wasn't in court, and she held Alara with the competence she applied to everything, and she and Vivienne drank tea and talked about nothing urgent, which was its own particular form of repair. Alara walked at 8 months and 3 weeks. She did it in the garden on a Tuesday, without audience, having apparently decided that the presence of onlookers was a variable she didn't require. Vivienne was inside getting water and came out to find her daughter standing at the garden chair with the expression of someone who had simply resolved a question that had been pending. She called Adrian. "She walked," she said. A pause. She could hear him registering it, the specific quality of a father hearing something for the first time that he cannot unhear. "When?" 30 seconds ago. I wasn't even watching, she just..." Vivienne looked at her daughter, who was now attempting a second step with the focused authority of someone refining a method. "She just decided." "Of course she did," he said. She could hear the smile in it, not the almost of a smile, the actual thing. "Spokane," she said. "Spokane," he agreed. She hung up. She put the phone in her pocket. She crouched down in the garden with her arms open and she waited. And Alara turned and looked at her with dark eyes and the specific expression she had. Not Adrian's, not Vivienne's, her own, already and completely her own. And she took 3 steps toward her mother and sat down in the garden path and grabbed a handful of dirt with the serene satisfaction of someone who had accomplished what she set out to accomplish and had now moved on to the next thing. The afternoon light came through the garden the way it came in May in Seattle. Warm, specific, the kind that didn't ask anything of you. Vivienne sat in the dirt with her daughter, and she looked at the light. She thought about the elevator, the doors closing, the rain, the particular weight of walking out of a life that had stopped fitting and not knowing yet what would fit instead. She thought about all the miles between that moment and this one. She thought, it cost a lot. She thought, yes. And then Alara grabbed a second handful of dirt and held it out to her mother with the absolute generosity of someone who has found something good and sees no reason not to share it, and Vivienne took it, and the afternoon continued in the quiet, unhurried way of things that are not dramatic but are nonetheless exactly what they are supposed to be, and nothing more needed to be said about any of it. Not then, not in that garden, not in that particular light. Some things end, some things become something else. The difference, Vivienne had learned, was not in the thing itself, but in what you decided to carry forward when the carrying became yours alone to do. She carried her daughter inside. The garden stayed in the afternoon light, yellow and green and ordinary, doing what gardens do when no one is watching, growing quietly and without instruction toward whatever came next.